My name is Kim Dorman, and I serve as the Community Engagement Coordinator for the Princeton Public Library. We are grateful to host this program in partnership with the Princeton Theological Seminary. It's my honor to introduce Reverend Dr. Jonathan Lee Walton, President of the Princeton Theological Seminary. Dr. Walton is trained as a social science ethicist whose scholarship focuses on the intersection of evangelical Christianity, mass media, and political culture. He is the author of 2 books and has been featured in national media outlets, including the New York Times, Time Magazine, CNN, and PBS. Dr. Walton earned his master's and doctorate degrees from the seminary and previously taught at Wake Forest and Harvard. He earned his Doctor of Philosophy and Master of Divinity degrees from Princeton Theological Seminary. Prior to his appointment at Princeton Theological Seminary, he served as Dean of Wake Forest's University School of Divinity, where he occupied the Presidential Chair in Religion and Society and is the Plummer Professor of Christian Morals and Pusey Minister in the Memorial Church at Harvard University. As I'm sure you all know, he is also an incredibly lovely human being who is intentionally thoughtful about many things, including community partnership and building connected, resilient communities, which is one of the reasons that I am such a fan. President Walton, thank you.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much, Kim. Evening. Good evening. Again, I'm Jonathan Lee Walton. I have the privilege of serving as the 8th president of Princeton Seminary, my beloved alma mater. And I welcome you tonight to this evening's conversation about the next generation and the intersections of faith and health. Now, our aim at Princeton Seminary is to be a learning community that continually expands the table of access by welcoming new and diverse voices, by engaging in community opportunities for learning, and also offering flexible and accessible programming. This is our mission at the seminary, serving and shaping communities and ministries that are marked by faith, scholarship, integrity, competence, compassion, and joy. I cannot tell you what a blessing it is to be here tonight, because we have 2 experts with us who are experts in the areas of health, faith, and adolescent development. And I couldn't think of a better place then to hold such a conversation than the Princeton Public Library. This is indeed a crown jewel of this town. Institutions like this one, the public library, they nurture our imaginations, they preserve memory, they provoke inquiry, and they defend intellectual freedom. Values and virtues that are so important at this time. And this is our aim at the seminary. So when we collaborate, whether it's collaborating here, thank you, Kim. Where did Kim go? Kim, hey, Kim. Whether it's collaborating here, institutions like this, or institutions like McCarter Theater, or so many of the resources that are a part of this incredible town. What we are doing, or what we see ourselves as doing at the seminary, is forming a bulwark against the rising tides of censorship, historical amnesia, and anti-intellectualism. You can clap to that if you believe in that. More importantly, we hope and seek to provide intellectual, emotional, and spiritual resources to promote healthy formation of our precious young people, which of course then promote the healthy formation and development of communities like this one. And so, again, we're thankful for you. We're thankful for all who have attended tonight, and we're particularly thankful for this amazing team at the Princeton Public Library. Now, to explore this topic with us this evening, we're privileged to have 2 amazing thought leaders, scholars, and intellectuals joining us here in Princeton tonight. First, I would like to introduce Dr. Almeda M. Wright. Dr. Wright is Associate Professor of Religious Education at a divinity school, kind of nondescript off I-95. also known as Yale Divinity School. She is a towering scholar. She is a towering intellectual. Her research, her writing, her teaching sits at the intersections of African American religion, education, and adolescent spiritual development. And particularly, she focuses on the ways that parents, caregivers, and educators can share faith and values with the next generation. Namely, she loves, and her work centers on Black, Indigenous, people of color, the young people in these communities, valuing their voices and what they have to teach us. She is the author of 2 books, both by Oxford University Press. Her most recent text, published in 2024, is entitled Teaching to Live: Black Religion, Activist Educators, and Radical Social Change. And her first book, The Spiritual Lives of Young African Americans, was published in 2017. And so please join me in showing your love for Dr. Almeda Wright. Joining Dr. Wright tonight is Dr. Suzanne Watts Henderson. She serves as the Director for Faith and Health at Interfaith America, also formerly known as Interfaith Youth Corps, under the leadership of Ibu Patel. Dr. Watts Henderson leads the Faith and Health team that creates and supports campus-based initiatives that strengthen the ecosystem between community organizations, health systems, and public health organizations. Through Interfaith America, she seeks to amplify the voices of those who engage religion as a social determinant of health that contribute to leading causes of life. Dr. Watts Henderson comes to this work after a long career. She is ordained minister in the Disciples of Christ. Also, let me add, she is a proud graduate of what some would argue is the leading theological education institution on the planet, Princeton Theological Seminary. And then she went on to do her PhD in New Testament at Duke University. And so therefore, she has served as professor of religion as well as campus minister, the Belk minister at Queen's University in Charlotte, North Carolina. Among her many publications, most recently, she is the author of New Testament Conversations, a literary, historical, and pluralistic introduction, published by Abingdon Press in 2019. Please show your love for Dr. Suzanne Watts Henderson. Listen, let's just jump straight into this. The importance of what we're talking about tonight when we think of faith, health, again, whether we're talking about public health or clinical health, faith, clinical health, public health, and adolescent formation. How do we even start the conversation of putting these in tight relationship with one another?
I'm a New Testament scholar, so that's sort of my go-to. I think of a verb that the Apostle Paul uses in his first letter to the Corinthians when he speaks and invites the Corinthians to be knit together, to be united. The language that he uses there in the Greek is medical language. It's language that's used to refer to repairing broken bones. And so when I think about the relationship between faith and health, I see this as a moment of invitation when we might knit back together these two notions that have been quite artificially and forcibly separated over the last, not that long, but over the last 100 years or so. And so it's a matter of reclaiming the rootedness of health initiatives in faith traditions of all kinds, including philosophical traditions. It's a matter of reclaiming the power, the positive potential of engaging religious diversity in health, both at the individual and the society level.
Thank you.
When I think about how I enter this conversation and even how we might think about thinking through health and faith and adolescent development, I always am coming from my experience teaching public schools for years, but also being a youth worker and all these other things. And the constant reminder that when we are engaging with children and families, that we're never engaging with just a student, or we're not just engaging about subject content. Instead, we're engaging with entire communities. And so part of the work that I remember wrestling when I was teaching or trying to teach middle school math and trying to figure out how to teach people fractions or trying to prepare them for algebra was not that I could ever just say, what are we going to do here? How do I give you the right strategy to solve this problem? But I always had to consider, how do we make sure that your parents have what they need to support you while I'm trying to get you to learn this concept? How do we connect with all of the influence, the systems, the places that are going to nurture who you are and who you are becoming? And I remember thinking, you know, there's theories, and we're always indebted to folks like Yuri Brofenbrenner, where we think about the fact that we don't ever develop, or people don't ever grow in just one place. Instead, we're constantly having to draw upon and or figure out how to help people access all of the systems, or all of the institutions, or all of the resources. And while we can debate how we want to think about faith, whether it's a resource or if that's a problematic way to think about it, but I remember being a public school teacher and saying, why isn't faith in this conversation as well? Why isn't there space for me to ask parents about what they believe and what their values are and how that might also support me in supporting their child in their learning? And so that's where I start, and thinking about, what does it mean for us to draw a circle wider around the many institutions or the many communities that are going to actually allow for us to have healthy young people or healthy families or healthy communities, and to make sure that we're not artificially separating or canceling out things that are actually ripe for nurturing what our young people and our families need.
So what I heard you describing in the classroom setting and scene, is what many of us know. It's hard for a child to learn if a child is hungry, housing vulnerable, right? Emotionally stressed for whatever reason. And these are all things that in the public health world that they would call social determinants of health, correct? Yep. And I know that that's been a major entry point for you and your focus at Interfaith America as it relates to faith as a social determinant of health.
Right. So, people have been reluctant to engage faith. And I think I want to say that's for good reason, because I think there are certainly ways in which religion of many forms can show up in the public sphere in ways that are not productive or constructive. And so the hesitation around engaging religious identities of individuals or engaging faith communities in public health initiatives, the hesitation, I think, generally comes from a good place. It's a place of humility and caution. And I think it's such a huge factor that we're missing something. So our focus as an organization is in helping people engage religion and religious diversity fruitfully, to engage faith not as a liability and something you kind of have to dance around, but as, to your point, Almeda, that it's part of the equation. And so how can we navigate that part of the equation? And it's not, when you think about the social determinants of health, it's of a different quality, to some of the, not that the material concerns are unimportant, they're vitally important, but the faith, the spirituality, the anchoring values it's just a tragedy to neglect them.
I want to speak a little bit about in terms of the tragedy. Why is it a tragedy, right? We learn and we're finding more data now about how spirituality affects the emotional and mental health of young people, right? I mean, how it's part of their just kind of emotional development. I wonder if you could talk a little concrete about this.
When we think about it, and I mean, we can just go back a couple years to the pandemic, really reminding us of like the ways that we've always had mental health questions or concerns among adolescents, but it became to the level, or at least in our awareness or our paying attention to, our attentiveness of the level of crises and the sense of like what it meant for this type of isolation, or even what it meant for us to really begin to think through what was happening for young people during the pandemic, and even just trying to find resources. Because the other side of the crises was a lack of access to good therapists, lack of access to good resources that were culturally sensitive and aware, and that were actually going to do good and not harm. And so really thinking about the places where, for many minoritized communities, in particular for my research, they were able to go to for support, mental health support, communal and social support, were shrinking instead of expanding. And so also having to remind ourselves of the ways that congregations and faith communities could continue to be these places of mental health support. Now, of course, we've got baggage and we've got histories where sometimes faith and even like mental health awareness are not in great positive relationship. But I think we need to not shy away from having those tough conversations around how do we help them have a better positive relationship, so that we can begin to remember to access these communal resources and even spiritual practices that allow for people to thrive, and to begin to think about how are the ways that we can build resilience in these communities with young people, so that they have access to more adults. So if their family structure might be a little shaky, what does it mean for them to have a church community or a mosque, or that they can go to, that is surrounding them with a different set of resources and extending who they have access to support them?
I'm sorry, I forgot. I was so captivated.
You look like you were deep in thought. No, that's all right.
I was so captivated by her answer. Please proceed.
No. Well, I tell you, you were talking about, let me ask you this, because you were talking about how, as it relates to social determinants of health, right? You were saying how faith is of a different texture, right? Than that, right?
Right.
And so, thinking about a community like this, right? Community like Princeton, or many communities that have excellent health care, they have excellent resources that other communities don't have, but young people are still crumbling under the weight of anxiety and spiritual restlessness. And so I'm curious about, in terms of what some of the data is showing about how faith enters that conversation, again, at a different tone and with a different texture.
Yeah, well, I do sense that in places like Princeton and community where I live, that there sometimes is this fairly broad misunderstanding about the role of faith communities as only negative, as only stigmatizing mental health and that kind of thing. So I think on one level, there is the opportunity for the faith leaders and faith communities themselves really to be deliberate in their messaging about welcome and care, and also for folks within the community to kind of to advance that messaging and to draw people in where there are supportive systems and structures in place. Yeah.
This, Almeda, your book, Teach to Live. Right? I'm going to pivot a little bit here, if you don't mind. I'm looking at the time, because I want to get to this. Your book, Teach to Live, it's an extraordinary historical treatment of educators that were informed by their faith. These were religious educators. Anna Julia Cooper, Charlotte Hawkins Brown, Lucy Laney Craft, and the ways that they were able to literally transform communities as educators, but they were really speaking to the whole child. And this was, we're talking about what some historians have called the nadir of African American life, kind of after the dismantling of Reconstruction, late 19th century, turn of the 20th century. And so what I'm a fan of, such a fan of your work, because you speak historically located, but it provides resources for the contemporary moment. And so I wanted to pivot to give you an opportunity to share how you imagine some of those resources that you learned from these figures.
Right. And so as we were talking a little bit earlier today, so I've been hanging out with these great people all day long. So there's some things that I'm like, did I remember what are we talking about? But earlier we were talking about the fact that writing Teaching to Live was an opportunity for me to do research and look for a book that I most wanted to read when that book wasn't yet here. And part of that was because many times in spaces, academic, community spaces, we are often looking for folks as role models or inspiration to remind us of the type of work that we want to do or that we feel called to do, but may not yet feel resourced fully to do. And so looking back historically to what I term as these religious activist educators, I began to find this inspiration. And so it was also amazing for me. I also, in this book, talk about folks like Septima Clark, who is the architect of the citizenship education program during the civil rights movement, and others who are these incredible people of faith, but who don't see their faith as something that is limiting, but also that enables them to move and work in the world for a larger beloved community or a larger, greater good. And each of the people that I catalog or that I like tell their narratives and get inspired by are folks who commit their entire lives to children, to teaching actual people. None of them set out at the beginning to say, like, I'm going to be a transformative, like, social work, like social, like, architect or things like that. But their commitment to actual communities is what then becomes the movement, the transformative power. And what I see and what I learn in each of these educators is that they are fully invested in the well-being, the wholeness of the communities that they feel called to serve. And so by being fully invested and to their wholeness and well-being, they don't just use one strategy. So they're never someone who's like, we're going to teach literacy. Like, for example, I love talking about Septima Clark because in order to register people to vote, she has to teach illiterate, former enslaved, but also now socially still enslaved, sharecropping people in rural South Carolina to read. But she's like, I'm not teaching them literacy. When she self-describes, she says, I'm teaching citizenship to these people who have historically been deemed as not citizens. Because what she's seen is that I'm teaching people, I'm investing in their ability to be able to determine for themselves how they want to live, what freedom looks like, what wholeness looks like. And that is a commitment to a thriving and a flourishing of whole communities and whole generations, because she's like, if I can teach one person enough to be able to register to vote, it meant I also probably taught them how to read their tax bill and to hold onto their land and to be able to have something that we call generational wealth that's going to then allow a whole bunch of them to come along and still live long after this one person that I've taught to read is gone.
And you would call this pastoral care.
I would call it pastoral care. I would call it radical transformative care. I would call it the beginning of, like, I mean, there's so many words that we would use for it. In some ways, like, you know, I love Barbara Savage when she talks about, she's like, some of this is just short of a miracle. But it's not miraculous in the sense that it is only able for some elite group to do. It's miraculous in like its simplicity, that something so simple could have such an amazing impact on entire communities. So thank you for asking about that, because I get really excited about that. Because those are the people that get me excited to wake up and keep doing this work, because they're generations behind us who don't have always a good sense of that legacy, or they haven't had an educator or a teacher who's invested in their lives so that they can flourish for another generation.
What I love about that is it really taps into the best impulse of any religious tradition, including ours, Christianity, which is the care for the individual, yes, but the care for the individual toward a broader vision of society. In our case, the kingdom of God, right? The basic dignity of all people, the freedom, the flourishing, the abundant life of all.
Suzanne, I actually have a question for you and tied to this, in thinking about Septima Clark and others. I love the language that you use, like they didn't view their faith as limiting, right? Their faith was expansive, right? Yeah. I was wondering if you could share with us some of the kind of steps at Interfaith America, or the framework that you use to take communities of faith beyond limiting theological worldviews, to actually build bridges rather than barriers.
Yeah, so in our name, Interfaith America, is suggested the fact that we promote engagement with one another across religious and worldview difference. And so when we say interfaith, that includes, as Ibu Patel will say, atheist to Zoroastrian. So it's everything from people of all faiths to people of none. And that's an important dimension. And our strategy for fruitful interfaith engagement is something called pluralism. It's a word that a woman at Harvard, we can talk about that other institution, has written and really advanced a lot. Pluralism is different from diversity. Diversity is the demographic fact of different identities. Pluralism is the practice of engaging across worldview difference in fruitful ways, and in ways from our vantage point that benefit broader society. So we believe at Interfaith America that America's religious diversity is a civic good, and that we can do better at unlocking the potential of our religious identities in the broad spectrum of them in civic spaces. And that's how we came into the health space as one of those civic spaces. So pluralism, we like to use 3 verbs: respect, relate, cooperate. And there was a colleague of mine when I was still on faculty who had, you've probably seen this, you may have this bumper sticker, tolerance, that has the different symbols of different religious traditions. Tolerance is wonderful. Pluralism aspires to more. Tolerance is okay, you stay over there and you believe your thing. Pluralism assumes that I have something to gain from learning about you, from learning about your belief system, from learning about your traditions, from recognizing some resonance and some rhyming across tradition without diminishing the particularity of it. And that's why we're thrilled to work with a Christian institution like Princeton Theological Seminary, or a Jewish institution, or a Muslim institution, because we believe in the particularity of traditions as an asset. So respect is just kind of this fundamental thing in Christianity. We talk about the image of God, the sacredness of all people, and most religious traditions have some parallel notion. Relate prioritizes relationship. It says, again, that I'm better off if I interact with people at a meaningful level who believe differently than I do, who practice differently than I do. And there's actually good research that indicates that even 2 meaningful experiences, 2 meaningful encounters across difference in a substantive way actually bend our trajectory toward more patterns of more fruitful interfaith engagement. So respect and relate, and then cooperate without diminishing theological or doctrinal differences between us. We identify a common goal. I love working in the health space because it's easy to say we want people to be healthier, right? A common goal. I come at that from my Christian lens and inspiration. You come at that from your atheistic human values, right? And that's okay, and that's actually a beautiful thing, and we come together in service to others. And so respect, relate, cooperate, all has to do with seeing ourselves, and this kind of circles back to the literature. I always love it when the research coincides with the findings of all major religious traditions ever, which is that we are better off when we get out of ourselves and see ourselves in connection to one another and something larger than ourselves. That's the beauty of it. So that's the vision of Interfaith America, and that's what we try to support people who want to operationalize that vision in civic spaces.
This, you talk about the data. National Cancer Society did a study, and 77% of people who had been diagnosed with a condition, cancer, a disease, 77% wanted their physicians to take their spirituality more seriously, right? And 37% wanted a physician or a healthcare worker that was willing to pray with them. Right? And this was a study, I mean, this is National Cancer Society. This study was done in New England, right? New England was not necessarily a hothouse of piety, right? So that tells you something. But what it really tells us is disease, I mean, and I'm coming at this because you talked about the great religious traditions. This is something that the great religious traditions have taught us. Disease is physical, but illness is social. Right? Illness is, and so when I think about, woman with an issue of blood, she has a disease, but her exclusion, her marginalization, that's a social reality that she is dealing with, right? And we think about this as it relates to HIV and AIDS and so many other cases. And so, you started us off talking about how your through line is as a New Testament scholar. I would love to just give both of you an opportunity to think about how your own religious tradition and these stories that we share and that we teach can be connected to the work that we're doing here.
You want to go first?
Just trying to think of a story. So, because it's like, put us on the spot then. No. No, when I think about immediately, because I am constantly working in adolescent and children and young adult spaces, what does it mean? The stories I think that have shaped even from my theological tradition and perspective, because I'm Baptist, ordained Baptist, so we do lots of Bible, by the way, just FYI. But I remember being shaped constantly by Jesus's interactions with and healing of children. And what does it mean for Jesus to take seriously when someone who's not of his religious tradition or community to come to him and say, my daughter is ill, or my son is ill. And I remember, of course, I love Jairus', the healing of Jairus' daughter. And so I'm like, that for me both tells me a lot about who Jesus was as a leader of Christianity, but also what does it mean for communities, for people who are quote unquote well-resourced or in communities of good resources to still need healing or need some kind of intervention when it comes to their proximity, their care, their life for their kid. And then also what it means for that healing to then affect the larger community around. Because once the girl is healed, that story spreads. People are changed because of what happens in that individual girl's life. But it's also one of those things where that story is interrupted by the woman with the issue of blood. That story is complicated because there's other healing, there are other things that have to happen. And so, I think, so that for me, I guess, is one of those places where it both inspires, but it also is so telling because there's so much complicated stuff. I love a good story to interrogate or for us to begin to think about what are all the different systems or people or players who are impacted when we are beginning to think about how an illness or how a disease or how healing even affects the entire community.
I love that. Back in the day, I was a Mark scholar in my other life. Maybe I still am. It's a text that forms and continues really to form and shape me. And my first thought, Jonathan, was I love the story in Mark 8 where it takes Jesus 2 tries to heal the blind man.
That part.
And, you know, I kind of want to, I love the oh gosh, not quite, got to try it again. But really my favorite, and I think my center of gravity in terms of a healing narrative is the healing of the paralytic, which is in Mark 2. What I love about that story is it's not really about Jesus. Jesus certainly is a lead player on the scene, but the friends, if you know that story, friends lower this paralyzed man through the roof. They dismantle the roof. Jesus is teaching a crowded room. They just, you can see the rubble kind of falling from the ceiling. They lower the man down, and the way the text reads, it says that when Jesus sees their faith, that is the faith of the friends, he pronounces the man healed, right? So the actual healing event comes through the community. And I think that sort of circles back to a lot of the point that we're making here and that the research is bearing out, which is that it's all public health, right?
Yes. There's a prayer, I know our Jewish brothers and sisters, Shebarak Elohim, and it's based off of teaching that you pray and you call somebody's name out, right, out loud. And it's based off of the belief that for every visitation, every call, every visit they receive, 1/60th of the malady is removed, right? And so once again, based on if illness is social, then healing,
right,
in the same way,
right,
is social. It's a public act,
right?
Listen, I'm looking at our time, and I know we have people here that may want to engage with a question, a thought or two. And so if you're okay, I figure we open it up now to questions. And I see one in the back, and we were supposed to wait for a microphone, correct? If you could just introduce yourself by name and then ask, before you ask your question, just so.
Oh, sure.
Thank you so much.
My name is Michelle Carr, and my first interaction with the Theological Seminary was at the golf outing. I was absolutely the worst.
You were the worst.
I got the prize for coming in last, but I made all 18 holes. I am a doctor of interfaith pastoral care and counseling, which I just got from a, I guess, secondary seminary in New York City, I'd have to say. Although I think it was pretty cool.
Yeah,
We had
pretty great
a
seminary.
cohort of many religions. I worked in an interfaith center where I had 80%, it was the Center for Jewish Life, but 80% of our constituents were not Jewish. My question, and I thought it was so genius, faith communities to be places of mental health. I'd love to understand, also I'm a psychologist as well, so I came to seminary as a psychologist, working with children in at-risk communities. So my question is, coming now back to Princeton, returning, I see a lot of our faith communities in silos. And when I came to the golf outing, I had an opportunity to talk to so many different people from so many different religions. I was a little hesitant because I'm Jewish, so I thank you for that prayer. It is just marvelous to hear that. And as a Reformed Jewish person, I believe in Tikkun Olam, which means repairing the world. I would like to know how we can begin to bring these faith communities together to really accomplish all these wonderful things that you people have done. I would also say I've spent half of my career as a fundraiser because without that money undergirding the kinds of things you're talking about, it's like banging our heads against the wall. So I bring these things up as a new community member, and I see the Theological Seminary as leading the way.
Well, since I get on a plane and fly out tomorrow, I can leave you with this great charge. What if the seminary were to convene, to be the convening organization for a community-wide task force advisory committee made up of, and I think this is important, not only diverse religious traditions, but also folks from diverse social and professional locations. So folks from healthcare, clinicians, folks from public health, folks with lived experience on the mental health front or in other ways. Identifying an issue, a question, an opportunity really that the community wants to tackle, and just kind of running a test balloon of what it might look like to deploy diverse theological resources, spiritual resources, towards something that your community needs. There you go. Found your head. Easy for me to do.
Towards something specific.
Towards something specific.
Respect, relate,
Cooperate.
and cooperate.
Right,
Respect, relate, cooperate. When the cooperation takes a particular, what's the task, right? What's
and
the task?
listening to the community, I would say, listening to the community, and especially those who are most adversely affeced in the current landscape. Listening to the community around what is it that we want to come around.
Yeah. There are questions. You have questions?
My name is Ray. I'm a retired. So I guess my question is, in the face of what the environment that we presently live in, where it's really very much of a me generation. It's very much a materialistically driven generation and society. And frankly, in my view, it's become almost an amoral climate where whatever seems okay to you is okay, no matter how it impacts somebody else. And I think, I'm not sure, but I think that in enrollment and engagement in spiritual lives and churches is lower now than it was maybe 20 years ago. So it seems like it's a mountain to climb for the ideas that you're presenting. And I wonder if you could speak to what seems to be an incredible gulf, particularly as it's now even more significantly influenced by technology, which is occupying everybody's spirit.
Yeah, that's a really important question. I appreciate that, because it's also reminding us of the ways that we need to engage across different religious traditions, but also with an increasing number of people who do not identify with the religious tradition. And that's not a add-on, it's not a footnote. Right now, that's a significant community. And so thinking about also really what does it mean for us to take seriously or to trust even as a conversation partner on equal footing those who may not identify. Because also when we think about those who would classify themselves as not affiliated with any religious tradition, there's a lot of diversity within that group. So even though it might be 30% of the, say, young adult population, it's not a monolith. Like all Baptists are not the same, all Presbyterians are not the same, all Catholics are not the same, all Jewish people are not the same. And so with that, we've got to take seriously the ability to begin to be curious about what does it mean for us to not be affiliated? Does it mean that we used to be affiliated, but now have had some kind of bad experience and no longer want to be part of that? And so we've got to wrestle with and do that uphill battle of like healing from that experience. Or is it never exposed? And therefore, I'm really curious about a lot of stuff, but not formally instructed or formally invited into any kind of community. And therefore, it's not a bad word. Like spirituality or religion is not a bad word, but it's just not part of my toolkit. It's not part of my lexicon. It's not part of my lived reality. And so I think that starting at that place of really paying attention to who is part of the conversation begins to help us then to say when we move forward, if we're trying to cooperate around a common issue or if we're trying to build coalitions, then we can begin to say, I'm not necessarily having to engage with the same 5 institutions or 5 big religions or 5, like when I'm even thinking about what's there, I'm trying to figure out how do I engage in such a way that I allow people to bring the totality of the traditions that they might be a part of, or even the flexibility that they have with thinking about the different traditions. For example, there's a study probably about 3 or 4 years ago trying to describe the faith traditions across traditions of young adults. And it was done and conducted by Springtide. And they described this trend as them having faith unbundled. And we're like, what does this mean? And so on the pejorative side, you could say that they're going in and they're like going to a buffet and they're picking this and they're picking that and they're picking the other. And we don't like that metaphor. But faith unbundled was like, no. I want the good of Christianity, but not the toxicity of Christianity. I want the good of meditation and this Buddhist tradition, but not the negative of the isolation or the sexism of this. And so there's a way that new generations of young adults are saying, we can see the messiness of these faith traditions and we're choosing to partake of the good part and to leave the other stuff behind. And even with that, that's a way that different generation might be like, you can't do that, you can't pick and choose. But I think young adults might be leading us somewhere to say, what does it mean for us to hold true to something that is good, but also to recognize that there's something in here that might be problematic, that we don't need to pass that on to a new generation, or we don't need to carry that rigid patriarchy forward.
You're saying young people are our prophets, is what you're saying. On some level.
And or canaries in the coal mine.
Yes. We still have another question here.
Hello, I'm Jamelia Davis, and I am proud to say that Dr. Henderson's husband is my pastor. But thank you so much for your talk today. I'm interested in food and faith. Can you talk on that when it comes to scripture? I understand we have disease and we are concerned with healing when it comes to disease, but what about prevention? And what do you see in the word when it talks about that?
There's some food in scripture, I'd say.
They eat a
Eating
lot
is
in scripture.
good.
Like, yeah,
There is enough and just enough, right?
No, we did Professor Afe Adegami did a large conference, international conference, just a couple of months ago at the seminary, where food and faith was at the center, right? Because there's multiple, not only as a relationship to the body, not only relationship to our land, to the land, but also relationship to the table and cultural identity and traditions that are passed down across generations, right? And so there's a million different ways to enter the conversation of food and faith. But one of the prevailing themes that I found most kind of generative at that workshop was the ways that food is tied to sacred stories and sacred narratives, right? And the ways that with each generation they can be interpreted and reinterpreted, particularly in healthier ways, right? Just as we find healthier ways to cook, we find healthier ways to identify with the food we consume and the land in which we cultivate. Yes. I also wanted to say something to Brother Ray, right? Because that was just such a great question. You had me sitting here on my heels thinking about that. And one of the things that I really kept coming back to was this definition in my tradition of hope. right? Faith is the substance of things,
Hope for, the
hope
evidence
for,
of-
but the evidence of things not seen, right? And so there's this difference between being a person of faith versus the certainty that comes with levels of confidence and even social privilege. Right? And so when people in my faith tradition, and even in my institution, whenever the narrative gets back to a kind of nostalgia or a reclamation project, oh, well, we get back to this. We get back to when we had theological leaders on the cover of Time, when they had influence in the halls of power, when we had this kind of culture, when the cultural mainline was the norm, right? Then actually, we're just part of a larger infrastructure, and it can become what some might even call a form of Constantinian Christianity, where you can't distinguish the difference between the faith and the empire, right? And so it's actually when communities of faith are on the cultural outs, and this is why, particularly even in the American context, when we think about Jewish brothers and sisters, when we think about, Latino, Latinx, African-American Protestant communities of faith, a lot of the prophetic, creative, spiritual energy have come from minoritized, marginalized faith communities. And so sometimes I find myself saying it might be a good thing that we're going through the kind of contraction that we are, because it actually helps us to begin to define ourselves and really identify the problems that need to be addressed in ways that are unique to us, not the larger cultural tenets. Yeah. So thank you for that question, my dear brother.
We worked on it, Kim. My name is Liz Moore. I have the privilege of working at Princeton Theological Seminary at the Institute for Youth Ministry. And come hang out with us. We like young people. But my question is, for the two of you, that both of the Bible stories that you mentioned are very transgressive to the community practices and even destructive, like tearing a roof apart to get in. And so I'm wondering if there are particular invitations that you see that faith communities might have to cause a little good trouble, to be a little disruptive, and perhaps a little transgressive.
So yes. That's the long and short. But I think, as you noted in both of the stories, there is this, but I mean, I think in most of the ministry of Jesus, or at least some interpretations of the ministry of Jesus, we got to be real clear, not all are interpreted the same way. There's often this element of really trying to push against what has now become normal or comfortable. And so I think this is going to your point just a second ago, really of saying, what does it mean for communities of faith to really see themselves as not the supporter of the status quo, but those that are actually called to push against it, to remind people of what might a more excellent way be, or even to offer rich resources to dream up or imagine a new way of being in the world. And so I think, because that's the other side, when you think about like faith and like as a public good, it's not just that like faith can function and do particular things, but it's also what is inside these stories that we tell that spark our imagination to see a new way today. Like, what are the things that we're trying that might say, alrighty, like, if this isn't working, is there something transgressive? But also, I don't even know that we need to push it as far as being like transgressive, but is there something that people just have not imagined yet?
Yeah, I want to wrap a few of these questions together because I keep thinking of the very early, the pre-Constantinian church and the traditions about how when plagues would set in, it was the Christians who would stay. So that's transgressive in the sense of I'm not going to look out after my own self-interest. And I think to your earlier point, social norms now are very invested in my own self-interest, self-protection, self-preservation, self-security. What if faith communities of all stripes were known for their willingness to stand with the weak, invisible, and, you know, just staying and taking care of the sick, right? That's a political act because it's cutting against the grain of self-interest. Where is the opportunity for our faith communities? And I think we're seeing it. I think we see it in fits and starts. I think the faith community, broadly speaking, in Minneapolis, has shown up in ways that have begun to take that forfeiting of self-interest, which is at the heart of our tradition, seriously. And I think, therefore, are inspiring people because it, again, circles back to the evidence that this is where our well-being, our flourishing lies, is in the good of the other.
And we need conversations like this because they often invite people to try something that they may not have thought was possible. Because we were having a similar conversation in Connecticut right before the cold snap, just reminding churches that it might be a heavy lift for congregations to run a shelter. But it's not as heavy a lift for them to become a warming station. So what does it mean for us to just even imagine a different way to empower communities of faith that have space, that have resources, that might have heat on the coldest nights of like the winter, to then be able to work with social service partnerships and things like that, just to be set up and publicized that this is a place where you can come and get warm.
And that's where you will find joy.
Yes.
And that's where you'll find life.
Thank y'all for coming to get warm here tonight with us. And we pray that you found some life and that you found some joy here with us. On behalf of Princeton Theological Seminary and our extraordinary partners at Princeton Public Library, give it up for them. We thank you for joining us. We appreciate you. Suzanne Henderson, Dr. Almeda Wright. Thank you all.